Hello, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. One of the most challenging things I find with art journaling is how to get rid of that blank page. Sometimes I like starting with a white page because I have a particular project in mind, but sometimes just seeing the blank page of your art journal can make it difficult to know where to start. So today I want to share with you 5 different techniques for adding color with acrylic paint onto your surface and be able to break up those backgrounds. So if you're new to acrylic paint and maybe you find working with the palette a little bit messy, one way to prevent there being as much mess is by using palette paper. What I love about palette paper are the sheets are easily removable. This palette paper has a silicone surface on them, so it really helps you be able to pull the paint off of the surface, but it's nice to be able to pitch these at the end of your project so you don't really have a lot of cleanup. It personally doesn't bother me, but if you are concerned about trying to add color onto your art journal and you're a bit worried about the mess, this is a great way to help you get started. So I'm just adding some color to my palette paper. I'm very paints, but let's just start with 4 colors. You have purple, turquoise, magenta, and yellow. And so I'm going to start with a little bit of the yellow. And one of my favorite ways of adding paint to a background is using a brayer. And what you'll notice here is that I tab into my paint and I take a little bit off to the side here. You want to cover the entire brayer fairly evenly, and then you want to add it to your surface. And you can see that it just goes on the surface really easily, and just a great way of just quickly adding color onto your surface. This side of the paper I gessoed, this side of the paper I didn't. I wanted to show you what the difference is between a gessoed surface and a non-gessoed surface. And if you want to learn more about how I do prep on both my canvas and my art journal projects, see the video in the description. That's a really great video for just starting with page prep. I personally like to start with gesso because I do find that it takes less paint and the paint goes on more on the surface, and that way it protects my page a bit more, and I usually get my paint to go further. So I'm going to go with a little bit of blue. And this is where you can add a lot of color. You can overlap the color. And there's a lot of options for just adding really fun texture and fun marks to your paper. And you can see how the different ways the paint lies on the surface gives you a good final result. And you might notice that I have some parchment paper here behind my pages. That just keeps the other pages clean. So if I have paint that spills over the edges, it doesn't stick my pages together, and I don't have a lot of issues with it covering too much of the other pages in my art journal. I also have silicone sheets that I use for this purpose, but today I wanted to show you the really cheap, grab from your kitchen version of this, which is the parchment paper. And so you have to be a little bit careful with colors, because you can see in some areas it's going to be a little bit muddy because of some of the colors I'm mixing together. But I don't mind that because I like the variety of color. I really wanted the rainbow effect on this. But this is also where you could stick to just one side of the color wheel, stick with your blues or in your purples, or you can kind of go crazy like I have here. I lost a little bit more of the blue than I really wanted to. So yeah, this is just a really simple way of just adding color to your art journal pages. And I probably went a little bit far with the amount of color that I've added. And part of that is because I chose so many different colors for this surface. But this is just, again, a foundational layer just to break up the surface. A super easy technique to use in your journal is paint swiping. And you can use almost anything for paint swiping. You can use an old gift card. You can use a proper scraper like this. You can use little bits of cardboard. These ones I've cut down so that I could have a little bit more control. You can also buy silicone mark makers like this to add color to your page. It really can be anything. I tend to use just random things I find around the house. I often use these a little bit more for work with mediums, but since I have it on hand, I wanted to show you how you could use it today. So basically what you do is you just put your tool in and you add swipes across the surface. So this one gives you a lot more of that particular texture. If you use more of a gift card, you can get very long swipes like so. A Ranger tool like this works very similarly to that as well, but maybe gives you a little bit more room to put on thinner and thicker layers depending on the look that you're looking for. And the cardboard is fun. You can choose which side you want to use. You can have the more textured side of the cardboard, or you can use the flat side and add color that way as well. So you can see that there are a lot of options with this. I find the hardest thing about this technique is trying not to go too globby with it. Maybe because I do a lot of medium painting and palette painting, I tend to go a little heavier with my medium. So I always find the challenge with this one is trying not to go too crazy with the layers and making sure that I leave room on the page for the next few layers that I'm going to be adding on top. There's a lot of potential to this technique. You can add a lot of different textures and get a lot of different looks by just adding a little bit of paint to your surface. I'm going to come in with a little bit of the more textured feel. I'm just going to put in some of those gold highlights. And this is where you can do little movements like that. These tools are a little bit easier to control than using just a paint swiping technique with a credit card, but at the same time, I like the credit card for being able to be a little bit looser. So one of the most basic techniques for adding color to your art journal page is by just adding water and paint with a paintbrush. I generally like to have a fairly watered down paint. You want to go on a little bit more thinly onto the surface, especially for those bottom layers. I always suggest to add thin layers of paint, and if you haven't seen my video where I go over some painting tips for art journalists, I do touch on this technique in that video. Because I think it's really important that we learn to mix our paints thinly, because I think we have a little bit more control and we can add so many more layers and do much more interesting things. And it works a lot better on the surfaces and the substrates that we use. So I'm just adding a lot of color, but I'm also trying to add a lot of water onto the surface. And I'm working fairly quickly as I do this, because you can usually just add in just paint onto your surface, and that's great. What I'm going to share with you right now is how to mix things up a bit. I'm adding some isopropyl alcohol to the surface, and you can see that just before your eyes, because there's lots of water on that surface, and because I put the paper on thinly enough, the isopropyl alcohol is moving the paint and adding lots of these fun resists onto the surface. As this dries, it gets lighter and lighter, and what's really cool about that is now you have a really interesting, almost watery type background to start off with. And you haven't done anything but add a little bit of paint and add a little bit of alcohol. So the key with this technique is don't put your paint on too heavy. Make sure you mix with lots of water and you will get a really cool final effect. So the other thing I love to do is start by just stamping objects onto the page. I have some more regular foam stamps, I have regular rubber stamps. I also have a section of cardboard that I like to use for stamping. I took a paper towel roll, and this part is the more regular circle, but I also snipped the top of the one end and laid it out, so that's going to be a fun mark making tool as well. The easiest way to add acrylic paint to your stamps is with a brayer. And you can see that's a very subtle technique there. So I'll do this one again, and this one I'm going to now add in quite a bit of this purple paint. So there you go. Now you have a lot stronger lines from that. And you can see that because there is a lot of paint on that, you can stamp 2, 3, 4 times onto your surface. And then you can follow up with your paper towel roll. And with these ones, I usually just take the paint, I dab it around onto it until there's a lot on it, and then I just add my shapes. I like rubber stamps, but this is also fun for just creating different shapes. Seeing what you can get onto your background before you start adding other things on top. And sometimes this will be just the inspiration you need to be able to do something different or unique on your project. And for this one, I'm going to try adding a brayer to the edges. I haven't actually tried this yet. I saw this morning and went, oh, why don't I give that a try? So I actually have no idea how this is going to work out. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And I think this is where you could move it around, or you could just press it down for different shapes. I think I prefer the pressing down over the moving around. I think if I had been a little bit more careful about how I move that, that might have worked out a bit better than it did. So that works pretty well as a mark making tool. And there are also foam stamps, and foam stamps can work quite well on your art journal pages as well. I always find I get mixed results from them, but I also haven't practiced with them a lot, and this is the first time I've used them with a brayer, so we'll see how this works out. Oh, it actually gave a really nice image. By adding in like more than just one stamp, by having all those different values, it also gives you a lot of variation on your page. And then let's come in with some more traditional stamps. The one thing about using traditional rubber stamps for this is try to make sure you get to a sink really quick. You don't want that paint drying on the surface of your stamp. You're not going to be happy when you can't get any of the acrylic paint off and your stamp doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And then back to magenta again. And some of these are really old stamps, so I don't mind using them because if they get paint stuck to them, I don't really mind. You can almost have a good section of the page done before you even just finish adding your mark making in that first layer. If you find certain ones, like I wanted a few of those circles to pop through again, so I'm just going to add them back on top. And this is where you can go back and forth with your layers and just see what you like, see how you want this to turn out. I'm going to be adding a whole bunch more layers on top, so it doesn't matter if it gets a little bit grungy or a little bit messier than you want. Another thing you could do is just stick with the one or the other side of the color wheel. I've been going a little bit crazier with the mixing than I normally would do on most of my art journal pages. So last thing I want to show you is how you can use high flow acrylics just to create very soft fluid backgrounds on your art journaling pages. And if you don't have these golden high flow acrylics, you can also use acrylic inks. There's a few different options for this. You could really also use India inks and other things for this type of process, but I wanted to focus just on acrylics today. So to add a little bit of acrylic to my page, actually I added a lot of acrylic to my page. That was probably a little bit more than I needed to. And by using some water, because we're using such highly pigmented acrylic paint, it flows quite nicely on the page. And then from here, because it's still wet, we can look to add a little bit of other colors. We have this indigo color. Because the surface is wet, you'll notice that you put one drop and it flows quite a bit. And this is where you can just continue to use water to move it around. And I often let it just drip off the page as well. And this particular surface I didn't gesso. I just thought I would let it go and see what would happen with it. And so I want to start a different color over here because I'm working with some green. And you can see how with one drop, look how thin you can get that color. And so that's really great for being able to add color onto your surface. And I think why a lot of people might balk at buying the high flow acrylics is that they are more expensive, but what's nice about them is because they are such high pigment, that allows you to be able to mix them with mediums and everything, and you don't have to use a lot of paint to get really intense color. And that's part of the reason I have a small collection of them in my art journal stash, because I see them as having a lot of value to my creative process. And I'm adding in some phthalo turquoise. And once I added that base of red, now I'm going across the page trying to add in other colors and see what different mixes I can get. And my suggestion with this is use a little bit of paint and a lot of water to get the mixes that you're looking for. And I'm going to add both the indigo and the turquoise at the same time. And I love those deep mixes. I tend to go sometimes fairly dark with those first layers, but I particularly love the results of them. And by chasing your color across the page like I have been, and just continuing to mix it, you can get some very interesting final results. This is a little bit more messier. You do get some overspray, so make sure to cover your surface pretty well before you get started. But I like that with only using a few drops of acrylic paint, you can end up with these fun, really loose backgrounds. And again, this isn't meant to be anything. Now I start creating on this and taking this background and seeing where I want to take it next. Do I want to add mediums? Do I want to add collage? What else do I want to add to this page? This is really just a starting point to see where you can take this. So I hope this is giving you some ideas on how you can use acrylic paints in your art journaling projects for creating those first layers and for just getting rid of those blank pages. And if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like it, subscribe, and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And as always, I have the supply list below that does include affiliate links, which gives me a small commission at no additional cost to you, and that's just another way that you can support this channel every week. So if you've enjoyed this video, check out this video. That goes over how to use a variety of inks to make backgrounds in your art journal. And if you're not comfortable with paint, maybe try giving those inking backgrounds a try instead. I hope you do try some of these techniques. They're easy, they're a great way of breaking up those blank pages, and I hope that you take some time for some creative self-care this week. I hope you have a really great week, and I will see you next time.